12 years had passed since the last sound of her breathing beside him, but the echo of it never left his bones, not through the rains, not through the silence that spread like dust across his skin, and not even on nights when the stars felt close. Enough to touch her name had grown into something sacred inside him, unsaid yet always present. The forest had taken her, and he had let it, because love sometimes means opening a gate you never wanted to build in the first place. But now something moves, something stirs in the smoke that coils above the treetops. A figure limps through flame and ash, broken, proud, familiar, and impossible. At once her eyes are not the eyes of a stranger, and he doesn't remember standing, but his feet carry him forward as if memory itself were pulling the strings. There is no roar, no violence, only the unbearable sound of breath, meeting breath after a lifetime of silence. She stops, and he whispers her name, not as a question, but as a prayer. And the earth seems to hold its breath in that moment. 12 years fall away, burned away by the heat of a bond too stubborn to die. She lowers herself slowly, her body shaking, her face marred by fire. But beneath the ruin, something ancient glows. Recognition not just of place or voice, but of soul. And as she leans her weight into him, and he crumbles into her fur, the pain of every day without her surges, then shatters into something softer. Time does not weep, and memory does not age. But in that collision between past and present man, and beast loss and return, something wakes, something undeniable, something holy. Each morning begins the same. The low hum of cicadas in the pre-dawn dark, the distant rustle of leaves shifting in wind that never quite touches the ground, and the thin line of smoke rising from Arjun's small stove, curling like a memory toward the sky. He moves slowly, not because of age, but because the silence demands it. His steps measured as if any sudden sound might disturb something fragile in the air. He boils the same tea, in the same dented pot, pours it into the same clay cup he once used to, cradle between his hands, while watching her play by the fence she used to run along its edge, her paws kicking up dust, her body a blur of fire and shadow. And now that stretch of ground lies undisturbed, the only footprints there are his, and they never run. He tends to the sanctuary out of habit, more than purpose, sweeping the enclosures, repairing fences that no longer hold anything, feeding birds that come and go, with no memory of the ones who stayed. The storage shed still holds her brush, still smells faintly of earth and fur and smoke. He never moved it. He tells himself it might still be needed, but really, it is because his hands cannot lift what his heart refuses to let go sometimes in the afternoons, when the light breaks just right through. The trees, he swears he hears her, the soft pad of paws, the low familiar chuff, but it always fades before he can turn. He no longer calls out her name aloud, but he thinks it constantly Sundari, like a mantra, like a heartbeat. He keeps the gate to the forest closed, though it no longer matters. She left long ago, but each morning he checks it as if some part of him still believes she might come back through it. Hungry, tired, needing him. And each time he finds it untouched, his chest tightens just a little more. He writes letters. He never sends scribbles of thoughts on scraps of paper folded and hidden in the drawer where her cub collar still rests small, absurd now, but soaked in memory. Sometimes he dreams of her alive whole. And when he wakes, the emptiness is sharper than it was the day before. The villagers greet him with respect. The forest officials pass by now and then, but none of them ask about her anymore. They used to, now they don't, and he is grateful for it, even as he resents it, because saying her name hurts, but forgetting her would be worse. He has grown used to the ache it lives in his spine, in his quiet, in the long stretches of time when nothing moves, when the forest hums and the world continues, but his world remains paused at the moment. She disappeared into the trees. Every movement he makes holds a trace of her. Every silence is shaped like her absence. And though the forest is full of life for him, It is only an echo waiting to be answered by something that once was whole and might never return. The morning he let her go, the sky was too bright, too blue, too clean for what it was about to witness. She stood at the open gate, ears flicking, tail twitching eyes, scanning the tree line ahead, unaware of the weight in his chest, unaware that each breath he took felt like it might break him. She didn't look back, not at first, and he told himself that was a good thing, that it meant she was ready, that it meant he had done his part. But his hands shook, and his mouth tasted like metal, and the sound of the gate creaking open echoed louder than it should have. She stepped forward, slowly, paws sinking into the earth, as if the ground itself resisted the parting. And then, in a single graceful motion, she disappeared into the green. He stood there for hours long, after the brush swallowed her whole, waiting for a sound, a glance, a reason not to feel like the world had just changed shape without his consent. When night fell, and she still hadn't returned, he didn't cry. Not then. The tears came weeks later when he found her favorite spot beneath the banyan tree, empty and undisturbed, as if she'd never existed. The pain arrived slowly, not as fire, but as cold, settling into his bones, layer by layer. Over the years, the sanctuary that once echoed with her breath, her soft growls, her laughter like huffs turned. Still vines crept up the wooden beams. Dust coated the corners of rooms once filled with movement. He stopped repairing things that didn't matter, stopped planting flowers she liked, stopped playing the flute that once made her tilt her head with curiosity. He wrote her name in a notebook. Once then, tore out the page because it hurt to see it alone. The forest continued on, loud and alive, but it no longer spoke to him. He would walk its edges, listen for her, call, imagine her eyes watching from a distance, but they never came, and with time hope began to rot inside him. He started to avoid the places she loved most, because the memories there were too loud, too bright, too unkind. Villagers noticed the change. Arjun, who once laughed easily, now spoke in short, quiet phrases, spent long hours staring past people rather than at them. They asked questions at first, but he gave no answers, and eventually they stopped asking. The days blurred together. He would wake, without reason, eat without hunger, sleep without rest. Each morning he checked the forest's edge, a routine that had no logic. Only ache time became a spiral folding in on itself. And the silence that followed her absence was not empty. It was full of the things he never said, the touch he couldn't offer, the goodbye he didn't know how to give. He wondered sometimes if she forgot him, if her wildness consumed the bond they shared, and the thought hollowed him. But worse still was the fear that she remembered and suffered alone somewhere out there, broken or afraid or worse, and he could do nothing. The seasons passed without ceremony, the trees bloomed and withered, the sky changed its colors, and Arjun remained unmoving inside a world carved around. A single moment of release grief had not left him. It had simply disguised itself as daily life, and he wore it like a second skin. Invisible to others, but undeniable to him, a quiet shadow behind his every step. A name always nearly spoken, but never dared, and so the silence stretched long and deep, unbroken, like a held breath, waiting for something, anything, to call it back to life. Let me pause for just a moment. And now I want to ask you, where are you listening from right now? Have you ever had someone, whether a person or even an animal, remember you after long, silent years? That kind of connection, the kind that time can't erase. It stays with you, doesn't it? If this story touches something deep in you, hit subscribe. There's so much more ahead. Stories full of soul, memory, and the bonds that never truly break. It began with smoke, not just the distant kind that blurs the horizon, but thick, choking smoke that seeped into his home through the cracks in the window frames. It smelled of burning leaves and something older, something bitter and familiar and wrong. The forest was on fire. They said lightning or carelessness, or both. Animals were fleeing. People were boarding up doors and moving deeper into the village, but Arjun didn't move. He stood in his doorway, staring into the haze, heart pounding, not with fear, but with something stranger, a flicker of restlessness in his bones, as if something had shifted, something important. The next day, someone showed him a blurry photo taken on a villager's old phone just outside the temple path. A tiger caught mid-step, its body lean and scorched its face, half-burned fur matted. But in those eyes, he saw a shadow of something that didn't make sense, not fully, not clearly, but enough to unravel him from the inside. The photo stayed in his hands long after the person who'd shown it had gone. He stared until the shape blurred, until the edges dissolved, and his breath trembled in his chest. It couldn't be. It wasn't possible. 12 years was a lifetime even for her, but still the way she stood, the angle of her shoulders, the cautious weight of her stance. It was her. Or it was madness. He didn't sleep that night. Instead, he sat by the gate with a flashlight in his lap and the air thick around him. The forest glowed faintly orange at the edge, and the wind carried 1,000 sounds, but none of them hers, and yet his hands wouldn't stop shaking. He told himself not to go. He told himself not to believe, because hope had always come with pain, but something in his chest refused to listen. So the next morning, he packed a satchel water-dried meat, the brush she used to love a scarf she once stole from his shoulder, and he walked into the haze. The villagers watched in silence. No one tried to stop him. The path felt longer than it used to. Branches broken ash. Underfoot, birds gone, the world quieter than it had any right to be, and every step forward felt like peeling away a layer of scar tissue, exposing something raw, something that still remembered. He didn't know what he would do if it was her. He didn't know what would hurt more, to find her and see no recognition, or to find nothing at all. But the silence had lasted too long, and even fear couldn't compete with the ache that pulled him forward. Because if there was even a chance that she remembered, if even one corner of her soul still knew his name, then he would find her or lose himself trying. He didn't see her at first, not clearly, just a shape moving through the smoke, barely more than shadow against the broken light of the burning sky. She was limping, head low, shoulders trembling with each step. The forest behind her cracked and whispered, with falling ash and panic, but she moved forward alone. Slow, deliberate, as if something deeper than fear was drawing her out. Arjun froze, his breath caught not in his throat, but somewhere deeper, like his lungs had forgotten their purpose. The figure stopped maybe 20 paces away, and the world contracted around them, narrowing to the space between his heartbeat and hers. Her eyes found him not in a grand cinematic moment, but gradually searching the air like a memory. Trying to take shape, she was, scarred her once sleek coat rough, and darkened her face marked with a raw wound that spoke of fire and survival. But beneath the damage, something ancient flickered. Her chest heaved, ears twitched, tail barely moved, and the silence between them stretched, so wide it felt like time had fallen asleep. He stepped forward, just one foot pressing into the ash and gravel, and her head tilted not away. Not in threat, but in recognition. Faint, hesitant, broken, but real. He said her name low, uncertain, like something sacred breathed rather than spoken, Sundari. And that's when she stopped completely, her body stiffened. Her breath caught visibly painfully. A shudder passed through her limbs, and he saw it in her eyes. Not fear, not confusion, but the flicker of something long buried trying to surface. He didn't dare move again, didn't dare breathe wrong, and for a second, nothing happened. Then her paw lifted slowly, as if weighed down by the past, and she took a step, then another, each one trembling, each one deliberate, her eyes never leaving his. And now there was no mistaking it. The way her ears flicked, the way her breathing changed. There was something in her posture that remembered him, not just scent or shape, but the soul of him, the imprint of all those years together before the world pulled them apart. Her legs finally gave beneath her, and she dropped heavily to the earth. A rough, broken sound rising from her throat, something between a groan and a sigh, and Arjun moved before he could think. Knees, hitting the ground arms, reaching out, and for a heartbeat. He feared she would pull away, flinch, vanish like a dream. But she didn't. She leaned forward, head heavy, pressing into his chest. Not hard, not desperate. Just enough to say, "I'm here," and I know, and everything inside him shattered. He wrapped his arms around her, feeling the coarse, soot-stained fur under his hands, and the tears came hot and endless, falling into her neck, mixing with ash and time and silence. She smelled like smoke and forest and something he hadn't allowed himself to remember, and still it was her. It was her. The weight of 12 years lifted and collapsed all at once, and in the middle of scorched earth and smoke he felt it. That click, that unspoken thread, tightening back into place. The world hadn't ended. It had only been waiting for this moment, this breath, this knowing. And now that it had come, everything else could finally begin again. Days turned slowly into weeks, and the forest around the sanctuary began to breathe again with the faint pulse of new life. But inside that quiet place, something far older and more fragile was stirring. Arjun moved with careful purpose, tending to Sundari's wounds, not just the scars the world could see, but those hidden deep beneath her fur in muscles, stiffened by pain and years of running alone. Her eyes followed him with a cautious light, not quite trust, but curiosity and something softer. Beneath the surface each morning, he brought her the fresh water from the stream, the food she once loved, small pieces of meat dipped in honey, and slowly she began to take them from his hand. A gesture, small but monumental, a bridge stretched across the chasm time had carved between them. She didn't roar or snap. She didn't shy away, but nuzzled her head briefly against his palm, as if testing the air between them for safety. And the sound of his laughter broke free like sunlight through heavy clouds. It was a sound he hadn't heard in a long time, a sound that filled the empty spaces with warmth and hope. The sanctuary echoed with the quiet rhythms of healing. Her paws padded softly around the enclosure following him, not out of obligation, but choice, and when he spoke, she sometimes tilted her head as if remembering old songs, the ones he had hummed to her when she was young and scared and lost. And slowly she began to play, chasing a piece of cloth, tossed gently across the clearing eyes, sparkling for the first time since the fire had burned her face, a glimpse of the wild spirit that had never truly faded. The nights were still long and heavy. Sometimes she would gaze toward the forest with a faraway look, but always she returned, and Arjun would sit beside her, feeling the steady rise and fall of her breath. The bond between them no longer invisible but woven into every touch, every shared silence, every flicker of recognition that passed like a current through them both. They were no longer alone, two broken souls piecing themselves back together with the delicate hands of memory and love. Scars remained both visible and invisible, but they were marks of survival, not defeat. And in that fragile space between past and future, Arjun realized that life had given them a rare gift, the chance to begin again, not as they were, but as they had become together. The fire had taken much, but it had not taken everything, and sometimes the deepest wounds were the ones that reminded you what it meant to be truly alive and to be truly seen. And in the quiet sanctuary beneath the healing trees, a man and a tiger found that to love is not just to hold on, but to let go, and to trust that some bonds are never meant to be broken. Some bonds need no words. They transcend time, silence, pain, and distance, because true connection never truly fades. It simply waits, quiet and patient, until the moment arrives when it can heal what was once broken and bring two souls back home.